Okay, today you guys we're going to be working on a cooling system. We're going to show you guys how to pressure test it for leaks. And so the idea behind this pressure tester is I can pump pressure into the cooling system when it's cold. Normally you have to let a car warm up. As the coolant gets hot and expands, you'll find a leak that way. But I don't want to work with boiling hot water, so this will attach to the radiator and I'll be able to pump up pressure in there while it's cool, and then I'm working with cool water. It's a lot safer that way. Radiators come with a lot of different type of filler necks. So we have this adapter kit right here, which is really comprehensive. Many different cars, different designs, and we'll be able to attach to all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, so the easiest way to determine which cap you need is to just do a comparison. And I actually had to try a couple different ones before I found the right one, but this is the correct one. Make sure you screw it on snug. It doesn't have to be super tight. When you go to put the pump on there, you want to take this little crossbar and put it up on these high spots. That makes it a lot easier to install it, and then once you have it installed, take that lever off the high spots to seal it, and it's just a matter of giving it a few pumps. Now, one of the things you want to make sure is you don't over pressurize the system, because you could burst the radiator if you did that. So a good idea is to check the pressure on the cap. And this one says 15 psi. So I really don't want to pump it much more than 15 psi. I'm going to go right to 15. And if you take a look, 15 is at the beginning of this yellow area. And then what I'm going to do is, once I get it pumped up, I'm just going to set this down and I'm going to watch the needle. And I'm going to see if I get any leak down off of this. If the needle stays steady, we don't have a leak. If the needle sinks down, got a leak somewhere. So I got it. Oh, I almost got it the whole way.
I think we found the leak.
Oh, okay.
So it's not holding pressure, is it?
No, it's not holding pressure. It's sinking slowly down. So
Yep.
if we do have a leak, it's just a matter of finding it.
Yep, so we need to remove this cowling. And we'll get a better view.
So it should hold pressure steady for 2 to 3 minutes is usually the test I do. We're already sinking down here, so you can see that indicates a leak. I want to relieve the pressure in the system before I start actually working on it. And so I'm going to turn this little T-handle. You guys hear the pressure slowly release that way, and then I can take this off really easily. If you don't relieve the pressure, sometimes the coolant will pop back out of there on you and make a big mess. Looks like we have a leak on the radiator, so we're going to have to remove a couple parts to get easier access. This covering right here just has some plastic clips. You can use a little pocket screwdriver. You want to pry up the center part of the clip, and then the whole thing should come out as one piece. Well, not as one piece, but I can get it out now. Don't lose these. You got to put them back in when you're done. Okay, we got that off, and now it should be easy to take this off. Like I said, set it aside somewhere where it's not going to get kicked around or damaged. Okay, now's a good time, since I have really good access to the top radiator hose. I think I'll go ahead and check that, see if it needs to be replaced. So the way I do that is simply just to squeeze it, and it should be soft but pliable. If it's very mushy, like an old banana peel, or if it's crunchy, we would replace it. This one seems to be in pretty good shape. Verify that exactly where the leak is, and now that I have some good access to see what's going on, I'm going to pump it back up with some pressure, and now I'm going to get a really good look at exactly where that leak is coming from. Once you get some pressure in there, it's pretty easy to locate where the leak is, because that pressure is going to make the water squirt out.
Yeah, it's leaking right over here off of the tank.
So it looks like we've got a cracked radiator tank. The tanks on this particular radiator are made out of plastic, and when they break, you just replace the whole radiator. To get to the radiator, we're going to have to remove a couple other parts. It pays to take this stuff out of the way because it's going to give you much easier access throughout the work that you're doing. And little stuff like this is just 2 hose clamps to get it out of the way and give you better access. Just make sure you don't break these things as you're taking them off. You have to loosen that clamp a little more. And then get one of my hose tools. These tools come in really handy if you have a hose that's stuck. And you want to be careful with these hoses because if you tear it, you have to replace it. And they're very expensive. So you just work this under the rubber edge and then try to slide it around. Of course, it's not cooperating with me. I'm going to slide this down to break the seal on there. And then that should come off nice and easy now, I hope. There it goes. And on this side, I'm going to do the same thing because I don't want to damage this. Get that under there to break the little seal. Now, it should come off pretty easily. There it goes. And then I'll just see if I can get this whole part out of here. It does have a little clamp around here, which just pops right out. And then I can take this whole intake tube out and get it off to the side. Okay, there's some specialized tools that'll help get this job done. First thing I like to use are these hose clamps. These are designed to pinch a hose down without damaging it. You just slide this clip up. And that should maybe help me make a little bit less mess. But what's really handy are these hose clamp pliers. This is a locking design for these type of spring clamps. And so if you fit this on here properly, then you can get these clamps off, and this thing locks in place. These are nice because they lock in place and they'll hold the clamp for you once you get it out of the way. And then I go back to this tool that we looked at before, and this is used to release the clamp. These kind of get glued on over time, so if you work this around, it helps again to release that off there so that you're not pulling on this fitting on the radiator, because you could break this if you crank too hard on it. Okay, so now I can move this hose out of the way. Okay, let me get some of these tools off of here. And I got a little clip here that I have to release in order to get that hose out of there. So I have a specialty tool, it's a little rivet popper. If I stick this underneath here, I should be able to just pop this clip up out of the shroud. There we go. And so this is what's held into the shroud right there, and this thing worked great to get that out of there. And I should be able to push this out of my way out of my way, so it's not going to interfere with the work that I'm doing, because the next thing I have to do is take the top of the shroud off. So there are a couple little plastic rivets here, and again I'm going to use my little pocket screwdriver hopefully to pop these out of here. There it goes. Okay, we got the rivets off that hold the cowl in the center, and then there's two 10mm bolts right here. Make sure we got that going on. So you guys can see why I like to use air tools. It just makes the job go much faster.
Like the magnetic tray you're using.
Then there are I always like to have a tray for all my parts that I'm taking off. That's why I don't lose them. And this one's magnetic. Some of the parts are magnetic, metal, and the other ones are plastic, but it's nice to have that tray there. There's one more hose over here. This little coolant heater hose for throttle body. And now I should be able to get this shroud right out of there. And we can start removing the radiator. The next thing I think I'm going to have to do is pull the bottom part of the shroud off. Sometimes you got to work that a little bit around the fan, or in some cases you might have to drop it out the bottom, but this one I was able to work around pretty easily. And now I have plenty of room to get the radiator out. The next thing I want to do is disconnect the bottom radiator hose, and there's also a couple of a transmission line on this side, and there should be one other transmission line somewhere. Maybe it's on the other side. drain or take the lower radiator hose off, I want to make sure I drain all the coolant out. We're going to use a catch bucket because coolant is a hazardous material. We have to treat it as such. Okay, every radiator I've worked on has what's called a petcock. It's the drain valve. And so this one's made out of plastic. I want to be careful as I unscrew that. And sometimes you might have to use a pair of pliers on there because these things get pretty sticky. I'm going to use these pair of pliers to give me a little bit more leverage on there. There we go. A little bit of turn on there. There it is. Loosen up. And so I've got my catch basin underneath there. This is going to shoot out with a stream usually. And I want to make sure I catch that. Or at least catch as much as you can.
That's some nasty stuff. Look there. So you could buy from the store, they'll call it stop leak, and it's like little silicone or little silicate that they'll put into the fluid. That you put into the fluid, and you could see it right there. That's why it's all that chalky color. And so obviously it didn't fix this problem. The stop leak never fixed it. I don't like this stuff. So just to show you the silicate, so you can see that this is the stuff that comes in the bottle for stop leak. So stop leak, it contaminates your system to a certain extent.
Okay, I gotta get my lower hose clamp off. Again, this tool is pretty helpful in getting these clamps off. Now this clamp feels like it's glued on, so it's just going to come off with the hose. And again, we lost a little coolant, but we'll clean that up. Okay, this hose actually feels nice and pliable. Although it looks like it's old and dirty, which it is, it's still good to use. These transmission lines have a little metal clip in them, and you have to stick this little screwdriver in the groove and make sure you catch that clip, because if you lose it, you're going to have a really hard time putting everything back together. I'm going to try a little dental pick, is what these are called, to get the little clip out that holds this steel line in. Just give one twist, these come right out. There's another bypass hose right here. I already loosened the clamp. Pull that. I'm going to try and get that one off too. And then the last thing I have to do is get this lower clip off, and right in that little spot there. Right there. Okay, I think I got it under there and just about off. And there you go. Okay, the last two things we got to do is take out these two 13mm bolts at the top mounting brackets. I should be able to just tip this out and lift it up. And there we go. And I can just lift it right out of here. It just had some rubber bushings it was sitting on. There you go, we got our radiator out. Always really important is to match the new part to the old one. So I want to sit these side by side and make sure all the connections look exactly the same. Has the same fittings for the transmission line and the two hoses that were on this side. And we have the same connections on this side. And the only thing we're going to have to do is transfer over some of the parts like these rubber bushings. And that looks like we got everything back in now. There was a little bag with the new radiator, and it came with these fittings for the hard lines that go to the transmission. And the cool thing is, it came with this little tool that will release those clips for you, so you don't have to use the dental pick like I did. I want to make sure you guys are aware, the radiator on the bottom, it sits on these two rubber bushings as an isolator to keep them from cracking and vibrating. And one of them stuck to the old radiator when I took it out, and one of them stayed in the car. Just make sure that both of these are in there before you install the new radiator. Okay, we're ready to drop the new one in. Just make sure you put it in the right orientation. And be really careful that you don't bump the fins as you're installing this, because you could end up creating a leak. And so what I'm trying to shoot at, two pins at the bottom have to fit into those grommets. And so I'm just feeling with my finger to line it up, and I got that one all lined up. And let me make sure this one's in, and there it goes. It's sitting down in the grommets. Now this just folds back in, and I just take those two 13mm head bolts that are here, and I just have to wiggle it around a little, get them started. Always make sure you start all the bolts by hand. 3 or 4 turns to make sure you don't cross thread them. Before I put the shroud in, I want to make all my hose and hardline connections. So I like to start at the bottom. It's just easier for me. So I'm going to grab the lower radiator hose. I got to move this clamp back, and then we'll be able to install this. The next one was this hard line. I've already installed the clip. Actually, the radiator came with new clips. You should just be able to push this in here, and you feel it snap. Give it a little tug or wiggle and make sure you got it all the way locked in. The next hose we took off was this one. Again, you want to make sure you get the orientation correct so that the hose isn't kinked. And then we can just use these pliers, I think, to put this clamp back on. The next to go in is the other hard line. Just make sure it snaps in place. And the last one is to the overflow bottle. And that is this one here. Slip that on, and then we'll slide the clamp up. And then I think we're done with all our connections. Oh, I gotta slide that up a little more. There we go. Okay, so I'm ready to put the lower part of the shroud back in. Just like I did when I took it out, I gotta fish it around the fan. Okay, I'm going to put these rivets in that hold the shell together, or hold the fan shroud together in the middle. The bottom of the shroud actually has a clip that fits into a slot in the radiator, and you got to make sure you get that snapped into there on both sides. And then once you get that in, I just got to put my 2 top bolts back in. Again, always start them by hand. And then we got one more hose to put back, the upper radiator hose. Just wiggle that on. I'm gonna get my special hose pliers. Okay, I wanted to reposition that clamp so I can grab it a little bit easier. And then I can just slide this hose up right where it was before. We're all set, and then take this clamp off of here, and we're ready to fill the system and check it. Okay, don't forget to place all these clamps back where you took them from. That's what keeps the hose from getting damaged. And then the last thing I got to do is fit the intake back in. Use a ratchet on here to snug this clamp down. Really important you don't forget to tighten these, because the air that enters the engine is measured. And if these are loose, air can bypass them. Unmeasured, or we call it unmetered, and that'll affect the fuel ratio in the engine. Okay, so right here is the sensor. It's called a mass airflow sensor, and this is what measures the incoming air, matching it with the correct amount of fuel. To install all the shrouding that you took off, it's really important to put this back, and we'll use those plastic rivets that we took out originally. So these work really easily. It's just a popped in the housing and through the hole, and then there's a little pin that you line up in the center here. Just push that pin down, it's locked into place. Make sure you replace them all. I misplaced this one, but I did find it. Pop that in. You want to make sure you leave things at least as good as the way you found them, if not better. Okay, we've got 2 different bottles of coolant here. They both have the same type of coolant. This vehicle requires Dex Cool, but this one comes pre-mixed, and this one is concentrated, and they both cost about 15 bucks. So the difference is this is half a gallon of water and half a gallon of antifreeze, and this is a gallon of straight antifreeze. We just need to dilute it with distilled water 50-50 to make the same matchup. And so when you buy the concentrate, you actually save a bunch of money. Okay, so I've already got an equal part of water in my bucket there, and I'm going to pour the rest of this concentrate in, and that's going to give me my 50-50 mixture. That's a 50-50 right there. This other bottle is already pre-mixed 50-50, so I don't need to dilute it. I just pour that straight in. This is a new tool that we're using. We just got this particular one from Mac. There are many manufacturers that make the same one. But what this tool allows you to do is suck all the air out of the cooling system, and using that suction, we're going to pull the fresh coolant back in to completely fill the system. So to get started, you need to hook this up to shop air, and then we're going to set this rubber seal down either in the overflow bottle, or if you have a cap right on the top of the radiator, you'll just go into the top of the radiator with that. Make sure the rubber grommet on the bottom is sealed up, and the next step is we're going to start drawing a vacuum on here. So we're going to use shop air and open this up, and we're going to start drawing a vacuum on the system. We want to bring it up to the green area, right about 25 inches of vacuum. Once you reach the desired level, we're going to shut this valve off and then shut the shop air off, and we're going to watch that needle for about 60 seconds. If that needle sinks down, it means we have a leak in the system. If it stays steady for about 60 seconds, then we're ready to go on to the next step of filling the system. And it looks like we're good. And once you've drawn the vacuum on the system, the next step is to make sure that this hose with the screen on it is completely submerged in the coolant. So I'm going to use a chair to make sure I can get that hose all the way down in the bottom. Okay. Next step is just to open up this valve right here. And what we're going to do is try to get all the air out of this hose, because we don't want to draw air into the system. So you see I got all the air out. There's the coolant. It may have dropped a little bit, but we're still in the operating range, so we're good to go. And the next step is simply to just open this and start filling the system. You can see the vacuum goes down as the coolant gets sucked in. The only thing I need to make sure of is that that end of the hose doesn't come out of the coolant. Okay, when the vacuum gauge reaches 0, you're completely filled up, and that's when we're going to close off these other valves. We don't want to overfill the system. So some air just came back in the line. That indicates we're at 0 vacuum. So I'm going to close off the fill, and then I want to open this purge valve here just in case there's any additional pressure, but there is none. And so we're done filling it. Next step, make sure you grab it by the rubber grommet when you wiggle this out, so you don't damage the tool, and then you can disconnect it from the air hose, and it's ready to go back into its container.
Since the owner of the vehicle used stop leak to try to stop the leak that he had in the radiator, the whole motor is filled with silicone or silicate. So we changed the radiator so we know that's clean, but the engine still has that silicate inside. You really should drive it a little bit, and then we should do a cooling system flush to get out all that silicate. That is really important.